Hello again, my fellow Hylians and friends. You know, one of the mysteries that remains so elusive among the Zelda community is the backstory of the Shadow Temple of Zelda Ocarina of Time. When I think about the Shadow Temple, several questions tend to come to my mind, like who built it and why? And above all, what was it used for before it was turned into a house of punishment and execution by the loyal Sheikah tribe? In today's video, we will explore the eerie atmosphere and chilling backstory of one of the most enigmatic temples in the entire history of Zelda, the Shadow Temple from Ocarina of Time. This place is as mysterious as it is iconic, and its true origins and purpose is definitely worth exploring in detail, so you are going to want to watch this video to the very end. By now, I'm sure you all know the drill, so I don't have to say it, but I'm still going to. If you like what we do here and want to support the channel, please give the subscribe button and bell icon a big Master Sword pedestal plunge to never miss when a new video drops. Let's make this channel your one-stop shop for all things Zelda. So without further ado, let's begin, shall we? Interrogations and Torture, Kakariko Village's History of Bloodshed in the Shadows. Zelda Ocarina of Time takes place during the time of the Hylian Civil War. And by the way, if you want a more detailed breakdown of the Zelda timeline and the Hylian Civil War, I've already made an in-depth video explaining the Zelda timeline and the most important events that took place in each era. For your general convenience, you will find a link to it in the descriptions if you want to check that out. Anyway, during this time, the kingdom was not the most stable place to live, so the royal family were trying its best to bring the war to an end as soon as possible, while at the same time trying to protect themselves and the greater sovereignty of the kingdom at large from the outside and internal threats. One of the mechanisms that they used to do this, like many real-life governments, the Hylian royal family had a very special task force that worked on their behalf from the shadows. This shadowy organization, or rather a very talented and magically adept tribe known as the Sheikah, had long since pledged their loyalty to the Hylian royal family and had been in their service for centuries prior to the main events of the game as the chosen protectors of goddess Hylia. Prior to their direct service to Hylia, the tribe offered protection and guidance to the Hyrule royal family and all descendants of Hylia, Zelda herself, or rather themselves. Of course, by now we all should know the Sheikah do have a say in the matter of who they owe their allegiance, which here means whether they choose to fulfill their destined task given to them by Hylia or not is still within their choosing. There are definitely cases of Sheikah going rogue and deciding to serve the side of evil. In fact, there is a faction of Sheikah so vile, so horrible, so extremely evil. I give you the Yiga clan and their leader, Master Koka. Now don't fear of him just straightening the wrinkles in your stockings. Anyway, the Sheikah had made quite a name for themselves throughout the kingdom, as many people refer to them as the Shadow People due to their secretive nature and mysterious magic. Now it is unclear whether there have been other settlements that were founded by the Sheikah throughout Hyrule, but what we do know is that Kakariko Village is without a doubt the main settlement of the Sheikah tribe. For centuries, Kakariko Village was off limits to anyone who was not a Sheikah or a member of the Hyrule royal family. Now this might make you wonder, why was Kakariko Village so exclusive? Is it out of prejudice and fear of others, or just simply security? To hopefully answer these questions, I will ask you to consider two things that most people already know about the Sheikah. One, they are a skilled race of warriors, and two, their service to the Hyrule royal family is literally their family business. To put it even more simply, the village was off limits to the rest of Hyrule not because of any prejudice or malice that the Sheikah carried towards others, but rather the village posed as a clever front to hide what lied just beneath it. The Sheikah guarded the remains of the deceased members of the royal family, including their treasures and secrets. This is why the graveyard that lay directly at the back of the village contained graves that could only be accessed by those that knew Zelda's lullaby, a tune that was only known among the royals or those trusted by the royals such as Link and Impa. And since we are on the topic of the Kakariko Village graveyard, this gives me the opportunity to segue us into the greatest secret hidden in plain sight behind the village, the subscribe button, and it's waiting for you to discover it and hit it. No, I'm kidding. It's actually the mysterious Shadow Temple. The Shadow Temple is both an object of scorn and one of the greatest warnings to all enemies of the Hyrule royal family. At least it was before it was decommissioned by the royal family, sometime after the end of the Hylian Civil War and never spoken of again. The Sheikah who carried out the dirty work, i.e. the torture and execution of many of Hyrule's most dangerous enemies, seem to have devised the temple to not only end the lives of those who were brought there, but also used their bodies and trapped souls for experiments. Inside the temple, the souls of the slain are damned and remain trapped in darkness with no rest nor peace. This would explain the many restless souls that reside in the temple, almost as if they are what fuels the inner workings of it. The ghostly ferry floating over the large bottomless chasm inside the temple is a great example of this. As it conveys its passengers to the heart of the temple, it floats along a river of fog. It is possible that the fog could be made up of the souls of the damned that met a horrible end at the hands of the Sheikah. And since the Sheikah was so thorough with their job, it does make sense that the Sheikah would devise a way to ensure that the condemned be bound to the temple in both life and death. And if this is the case, there really was no other way to repurpose the temple after it was decommissioned, so it was sealed up tight behind an unmovable stone door, marking an end to a dark era of Hylian history, but standing out as an example of how ruthless the Hylian monarchy could be. The temple would remain a blight on the royal family's history forevermore. What was the Shadow Temple before it was turned into a house of horrors? Due to the unspeakable things that took place in the Shadow Temple, it was sealed, and even merely speaking about it is considered taboo among the Hyrule royal family. Now that explains the great shame that the temple brought to the royals, as it was an example of the very stringent and strong military stance that the royals had taken to maintain the stability of the kingdom during the Civil War. It was pretty easy for the Hylian monarchy to hide their dirty work, considering only the Sheikah or the royals themselves knew how to gain access to the temple, and all others were more likely to be condemned prisoners of war, and the temple would be their final resting place anyway. So the chances of any leaks of information about the whereabouts or existence of the Shadow Temple was very slim. Before the Shadow Temple became synonymous with the horrors of interrogation, torture, and execution at the command of the Hylian royal family, it likely existed as a sacred and enigmatic site whose purpose reflected the Sheikah's ancient role as guardians of balance, watchers of the unseen, and keepers of forbidden knowledge. So imagining what it might have been before its corruption requires considering both the Sheikah's unique relationship with Hyrule and the recurring motifs that permeate its design. Long before the temple's halls echoed with the cries of prisoners, the Sheikah may have constructed it as a sanctuary dedicated to shadow and spirit, a place where they could commune with the afterlife, seek guidance from the ancestors, and maintain a balance between light and dark. The Sheikah, also known as the shadow of the royal family, were entrusted with secrets too dangerous for ordinary people, and part of their power may lie in their connection to illusion, stealth, and the spiritual realm. Now you may ask, what does that have to do with the Shadow Temple? I'll ask you to consider this. The architecture of the Shadow Temple, filled with the depictions of skulls, reapers, rivers of the dead, and hidden passageways. This suggests that it was not built for cruelty at its inception, but rather as a spiritual threshold, perhaps a liminal space between life and death. The imagery may reflect an acceptance of mortality, not as something to be feared, but as a fundamental truth that must be acknowledged and respected. And the temple's dark rituals could have been designed to honor the dead, to ward off restless spirits, and to prevent curses from spilling into the living world. The Sheikah's mastery of shadow magic, foresight, and illusion would have found its greatest expression here, with ceremonies that might have allowed them to glimpse the flow of destiny, to speak with the spirits, or to seal away dangerous entities beyond the reach of mortal interference. Just to use the Shadow Temple's River of the Dead as another example, the river may not have always symbolized despair, but a passage of the soul, an underworld-like current meant to cleanse and carry spirits safely onward. While its macabre statues and grotesque imagery could have once served as a protective ward designed to frighten away evil spirits and remind visitors of the seriousness of tampering with the forces of shadow. In this regard, the Shadow Temple is less of a place of punishment and more of a fortress of spiritual guardianship, where only the most trusted of the Sheikah could tread, performing rites that maintain Hyrule's stability from the shadows, unseen but essential. Over time, however, as the royal family sought to consolidate its control, the temple's sacred power was twisted for political purposes. Its original rituals forgotten or deliberately suppressed, and its labyrinthian halls became a prison of terror, where the Sheikah, bound by their oath of loyalty, turned their knowledge of darkness towards the service of the throne. What was once holy became corrupted, and its legacy was buried beneath bloodshed, yet faint traces of its original nature remain. That nature is the sense of reverence for death, the architectural symbolism of passage and transition, and the aura of mystery that lingers even in its most gruesome chambers. In this way, the Shadow Temple tells a dual story of a sanctuary once built to honor the unseen truths of life and death, and of a sanctuary defiled when fear and authority repurposed it into a monument of suffering, leaving behind not only physical scars in its walls, but also a metaphysical wound in the balance of Hyrule's light and shadow. Why is Nocturne of Shadows the only way to access the Shadow Temple? The fact that the Shadow Temple can only be accessed by playing the Nocturne of Shadow is not just a matter of gameplay design, but a deliberate narrative and symbolic choice that reinforces the themes of secrecy, inevitability, and the very dangerous knowledge buried in Hyrule's past. Because unlike the forest, fire, water, and spirit temple, which are all tied to elemental and physical locations in the natural world, the Shadow Temple exists as a liminal space between the living and the dead, hidden away in the folds of darkness. And such a place cannot simply be reached by walking across Hyrule Field. It requires a ritual, a song that resonates with the wavelength of shadow itself to unlock its gates. The Sheikah who constructed and guarded the temple were masters of secrecy and spiritual wards, and it makes sense that they would design their most forbidden sanctuary to be accessible only through a sacred melody, one that could not be discovered casually or forced open by ordinary means. The very name Nocturne of Shadow tells us why this barrier exists. A nocturne is a song inspired by the night, contemplative, mournful, and quiet, and it invokes a sense that entering the Shadow Temple is not a triumph but a solemn passage into darkness, a moment of acceptance that the hero must confront the hidden sins of Hyrule no matter how terrible they are. Sheik's introduction of the song is not framed as a reward, but as a grim necessity after Kakariko village is attacked and set aflame by the awakening of Bongo Bongo, underscoring that access to the Shadow Temple only comes when fate dictates it so, not before. This reinforces the idea that Shadow is not a realm to be entered lightly, but one that demands preparation and destiny. So, the Nocturne of Shadow functions as both a magical seal and an initiation rite, ensuring that only one chosen by the Sheikah, or by extension the royal family, may safely enter without being consumed by the restless spirits within. Because the Shadow Temple is not merely a dungeon, but a prison of cursed souls. A place where the living and the dead blur, and attempting to force entry without the song's protection could mean eternal entrapment. Unlike warp songs such as Minuet of Forest or Bolero of Fire, which serve mainly as a convenient travel shortcut, the Nocturne of Shadow stands apart as a gatekeeper melody, a key woven into music that aligns Link's spirit with Shadow so that he can survive the horrors within. As a ritual, the Nocturne symbolizes Link's willingness to step fully into the role of the hero of time by facing not only monsters born of nature or magic, but the darkness of Hyrule's history of corruption hidden just underneath its polished exterior. The Nocturne of Shadow greatly reflects the gravity of entering a temple built on the foundation of Hyrule's blood-soaked past. And unlike the more uplifting or adventurous titles of the other warp songs, this one signals to the player that entering the Shadow Temple is not an act of triumph, but only solemn duty. Entering the temple is not about strength or cleverness, but about accepting a solemn inheritance, stepping into the burden of the past with eyes open. In the end, the exclusivity of the Nocturne of Shadow demonstrates that the Shadow Temple is not a dungeon like the others, but a metaphysical threshold. Only by embracing the melody of darkness and aligning with the Sheikah's shadowy legacy can the hero of time pass through. So the requirement of the Nocturne is not arbitrary, it is essential. The court's conclusion. And this brings us to the end of yet another deep dive into the amazing lore of one of Legend of Zelda's most enigmatic temples. The Shadow Temple concluded its presence in the story as a chilling reminder that Hyrule's history is not defined solely by light, heroism, and divine protection, but also by darkness, secrecy, and bloodshed. Unlike the other temples that embodied elemental forces of nature, the Shadow Temple represents the unseen cost of maintaining order. A place built by the Sheikah as both a sacred site of ritual and later a chamber of interrogation and execution under the command of the royal family. Its imagery of skulls, coffins, guillotines, and rivers of the dead suggests that it was never meant to be a place of comfort, but a monument to mortality and hidden sin, a prison for restless spirits and dangerous truths that cannot exist in the light. The presence of Bongo Bongo, a vengeful phantom born from this corruption, cements the temple as the embodiment of suffering and unfinished business, forcing Link to confront not only a monster, but the weight of Hyrule's hidden past. The haunting lore of the Shadow Temple concludes with the sobering message that even in a kingdom celebrated for courage and wisdom, peace is often upheld by shadows no one dares to speak of. So, what do you think of my synopsis of the Shadow Temple? Would you yourself want to visit the Shadow Temple for a ghostly encounter or two? I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments. Also, I want to give a big shout out to everyone who has recently subscribed to the channel, as well as those who've joined Crispy Kingdom The Fellowship over on Patreon. Thanks for your support. Well, that's all I've got for this one, guys. Have a great day and be safe out there. And be sure to tune in for the next great video. This has been Chris of Crispy Kingdom. The council is dismissed.